Hey everybody, this is Brett Grayson of Tactical Pay Radio, reminding you that the podcast you're listening to is a proud member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. Check out all the great content at selfdefenseradio.net.
Welcome to Unload and Show Clear, the podcast about all things IDPA. And now, here's your host, the only man to shoot the same non-threat 4 times at Nationals, Lloyd Bailey.
Welcome to another episode of Unload and Show Clear. This is a podcast about the men and women who compete in IDPA, International Defensive Pistol Association. Now, I've been attending IDPA matches since 2011, and over the years, I've met some really amazing people thanks to this sport. Ignore all the colorful jerseys and the sponsor logos, and underneath you're going to find everyday men and women who volunteer their time and their effort and spend their hard-earned dollars on travel, match fees, and gear to make this sport great. And today you're going to meet another one of these awesome people. But first, I want to thank today's sponsor. You've heard me and some of the guests on the show talk about the benefits of dry fire. It's the easiest, most inexpensive way to get better as a shooter. But it's got some drawbacks, one of those being that it can be boring, quite frankly. So one thing you can do is use a laser bullet. But if you use a laser bullet by itself, once the dot's gone, it's gone. So you have that tendency to try to peek over your sights and look at the dot on the target. But now you can use the iTarget Pro system. It gives you instant feedback and lets you see exactly where you're hitting. Just place your phone in this iTarget sled, point the camera at the target. The app then monitors your target for hits from the laser bullet and maps them on the screen, showing you exactly where you shot. It's really cool. No more peeking at your target to see where you hit. Just watch your sights like you normally would. Let the app do the rest. iTarget Pro is available for Android and Apple phones. Laser bullets are available in all of the popular pistol calibers, 9mm, 45, 40 Smith & Wesson, 38 Special. There's even a version that you can use with your favorite .223 or .556 caliber rifle. iTarget Pro offers you a safe and effective dry fire training tool that will make your training fun again. Check it out at itargetpro.com. Our special guest today is Mike Oxner from Post Falls, Idaho. Mike, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Lloyd.
Well, tell us a little about yourself and what you do for a living there in Post Falls.
Well, I'm a full-time firearms instructor, and part of what I do is face-to-face instruction. A lot of what I do is actually creating training aids that are used by instructors and used by shooters in their homes to do dry fire more effectively.
And I believe, in fact, I think we've had a couple of guests who've mentioned one of your products. Go ahead and plug the one that most people would be familiar with.
Well, dry fire training cards is our, I guess, the one that most people are familiar with. And a lot of people, especially in IDPA, have used just part because of the effectiveness and part because I sponsored a few events, backup gun nationals, indoor nationals, world championships, and some regional events.
All right. So before we talk about your shooting career and how you got started, what was the impetus behind or the thought process behind creating the dry fire training cards? It
was a pretty it was an organic process. Basically what happened was I was a real estate investor, and in 2008 when the market collapsed, our finances collapsed and got to a point very quickly where we had absolutely no money to shoot. And I'd had a background. I was incredibly fortunate. I got to be a part of a test when I was young that the Mayo Clinic did on using biofeedback in the hypothalamus to get rid of migraines, because I had a lot of migraines. And then when I got older, I had the opportunity to work with track and field coaches, Olympic track and field coaches, and learned a lot of training processes that just actually a lot of them still aren't in the mainstream. And so here I was, fast forward to 2008, I didn't have money to train with live ammo. And I thought, what if I can combine some of these things that I've done in the past that have worked very well in other areas and apply them to firearms training? And long story short, I improved more in the next couple of months than I had in the last few years. Started sharing it with guys who were military and law enforcement instructors, and they had the same impact, same effect. And so I wrote a book, and people loved the book, but it was called Tactical Firearms Training Secrets, and co-wrote it with a couple other guys. And the only thing was, people wanted to know specific drills to do, not necessarily all of the science behind how to train. And so got together. It was myself, Larry Yatch, who was a former Team 3 SEAL, Chris Graham, who's a Force Recon Marine, and a few other guys, and we created dry fire training cards. And the rest is kind of history. That was, I believe it was 6 or 7 years ago when we released those.
Very good. So going back all the way back to the beginning, this question's coming. How did you, growing up I assume you're a native of Idaho and grew up around guns as a kid, introduced to them early on?
I actually grew up in Nebraska.
Oh.
And grew up on a farm in Nebraska. And yeah, I was using guns. We don't know. We don't remember how early I was shooting, but we're guessing it was somewhere between 3 and 5. And when I was 8, my dad had planted a shelter belt, which basically a couple of thousand seedling trees to block our house from the wind and the blizzards in the winter.
Right.
And the rabbits were going nuts on them. And so when I was 8, when I get home from school, before I could come in the house and play, I had to shoot a rabbit every day. And so it was just shooting, whether it was target practice, whether it was plinking, whether it was hunting, it was just part of life growing up.
Very cool. What was the first gun you bought for yourself?
A Daisy 881 pellet gun.
You'll put your eye out.
Yeah, exactly.
When you what was the first modern firearm that you bought?
That's a different answer. Yeah, it was a Smith & Wesson 40 caliber Sigma series that I got when I was in college.
All right,
and it was a rough gun, but I could afford it.
Right,
and it was a good gun for a few years.
Cool. So where did the interest in competition come from?
The biggest thing is I'm just competitive by nature.
Mm.
And so I'd be shooting, and guys at the range would normally ask people if they wanted to come and shoot at upcoming matches. And so I started doing that, I guess, late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was kind of on and off again as we moved and as life situations changed. And then really the last 5 or 6 years, I've done 7 years, a lot more IDPA.
Right. Do you remember the first IDPA match?
I remember the first match I did, and I think it was an IDPA match, but I'm not positive if it was. But it was back in would have been the late 90s, and I thought I was hot stuff. And I had I had to go get basically the equivalent of an Uncle Mike's holster because I didn't have a holster for my gun.
Oh,
I was so good I didn't need one. And it had the nylon strap and the snap.
Mm-hmm.
And first thing that happened when I got there was they asked me if I was really going to shoot with that. And there was a guy who he was nice enough to pull out his knife and cut the strap off for me. And so had one thing taken care of, but on my first or second string of fire, it was a 1911 I was shooting, and I got horrible snake bite. And I had my left thumb over the back of the beaver tail.
Ooh.
And blood was flying everywhere, and it was a mess. And I was very humbled and learned a lot from that experience.
I imagine. What do you remember when and where your first sanctioned match was?
That was, as far as not a local match, that probably would have been Backup Gun Nationals.
Mm-hmm.
In maybe 05, 04.
Okay. And what do you remember about that match? Because I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned sponsoring Backup Gun Nationals. You are a backup gun master. And what is it about backup gun that has attracted you and made that because normally everybody seems to start the entry point for most people is SSP, right? Bug
Mm-hmm.
is a whole different creature. What is it about that division that you like, and what makes it so different?
There's two big things. Number one is that's what I carry every day.
Mm-hmm.
And so the purpose of IDPA for me, it's fun, definitely, but one of the biggest things is I want to hone my skill in case I ever need to use my firearm to defend myself or someone I love. And so it's just never made a whole lot of sense to me to use a fancy race gun for competition and then switch over to what I carry every day that may or may not save my life, depending on how much I practiced with it.
Right.
So that's one of the big reasons. The other is, as an instructor, I know I can go in front of a tactical team, any level of shooter, and when they see me doing what I do with a subcompact, a lot of times it will break through barriers much, much quicker than if I was using a tricked out full-size gun.
Gotcha. When did you mentioned your first match, you were there with a 1911 and an Uncle Mike's holster. How did that transition from being that guy, and we've all been that guy, to firearms instructor? How did that happen? What made you decide that you wanted to teach people how to shoot better?
It was really just a process. When I created the system that I used to do dry fire at home and had such good results, people started asking me to teach them how to shoot because they'd seen how quickly and how much I improved.
Right.
And it just progressed from there over time.
So did you had no background in, I know this is one of those arguments in the instruction community, you didn't have the background in law enforcement or the military or any of that stuff. You went out and learned to become a shooter and learned to become an instructor. That takes quite a bit of determination and effort, because that's not easy, especially when people look at you and say, well, what have you done before? And I've never been one who's ascribed to he has that shingle or he has that, the badge or the stripes that automatically tell me he's a good instructor. That's a tough barrier to overcome, isn't it?
It definitely was early on. And fortunately, there's been enough inertia built over the last few years with students getting incredible results that I just don't run into that anymore.
Right.
And one of the biggest things is that I stay in my lane. So somebody who has a 20-year SWAT background or somebody who's got 3, 4, 5 deployments overseas, they've got way more practical knowledge about tactics than I do. But there's a decent chance that I have a better grasp on proper technique and efficient teaching methods and efficient learning methods than they do. And one of the big reasons for that is because of the way that people who have military and law enforcement backgrounds were taught. In fact, military and law enforcement training is not as efficient as it could be. And when you're shooting on somebody else's dime, that's not that big of a deal. But when all of a sudden you're paying for every round, or you're spending the time to reload every round, then all of a sudden time and money makes a big, big difference. And you want to get as much gains in performance as possible with as little time as you can.
Right. So you said the last 5-7 years you've done more IDPA shooting. What's your schedule like? What's a typical year like for you in terms of local matches and sanctioned matches and preparation?
The most regular thing I do is our local chapter has 2 shoots a month, and I usually shoot one or both of those, and I actually shoot them with my 9-year-old son. He just turned 9. He's been shooting with me for about 3 years now, and he does them. He shoots them with either airsoft or a pellet gun, because the two things. One, the angle on headshots just doesn't work, or even with the 22. It's just not a safe thing to do on close-up headshots.
Yep.
The other thing is, especially at first, we just used airsoft, and it made it much more relaxing correcting him on having his finger on the trigger, getting close to the 180, doing things that were getting close to a safety issue.
Right.
The consequence just wasn't near as severe with an airsoft in his hand as with a 22.
Right.
And so it made for a much more conducive learning environment to work with him with an airsoft and let him get matches under his belt and let him get used to moving and shooting and the stress of competition and the 15-point IQ drop that happens when the beeper goes off.
Right. That's very cool.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. When I can, I do bigger matches. Actually didn't get any traveling matches this year just because schedules didn't work.
Right.
But usually I try and get in between 1 and 4 major matches, either regional ones or national ones.
What are some good ones that are accessible for you in Idaho?
The Idaho State Championship and Washington State Championship are both pretty close. Other than that, everything requires a flight.
Gotcha.
So
that does put a little bit of a damper on things.
Yes.
So give a shout out to your home club. You mentioned going to their bi-monthly matches. Give us a little idea of who the people are that you shoot with and what their facilities are like and what kind of a club they are.
Well, it's at Center Target in Post Falls, and the crew that runs it's great group of guys, and got Jay Tavares, who used to be over in Seattle and was basically able over there. Depending on the club, he could shoot almost every night of the week. And so he's got a lot of experience on stage design and as an SO, and he's seen pretty much everything and adds a lot of stability and experience to the group. And then, it's a great bunch of guys. We've probably got about 20 who are there most weeks. And then it fluctuates from that core group of 20 up to 30 or 40. And since it's North Idaho and sometimes of the year we have feet of snow on the ground, or we shoot indoors pretty much year round.
I've seen pictures of that white stuff.
Yeah.
So, coming from the background of the defensive mindset and your mindset as an instructor and trying to hone your skills as a concealed carrier, what do you like in a match? What do you look for? Some people like the really technical stages. They like some people like tight shots with lots of non-threats. Some people like movers. Some people like stages that make them move a lot. What kind of things do you like to shoot? I like stages with moving targets, with hard shots, a combination of short and long, so that the cadences are as different as possible on the same stage. Right.
We might have some shots that are fairly slow from one to the next, and then just burn it down on maybe the next target.
Right.
And I tend to not like stages that have gotchas that depend on an intricate knowledge of the rules, and more stages where you see them, you shoot them.
Right.
And there may be some decision making where there's multiple ways to address a stage, and you've got to figure out how you're going to do it and what's going to be the best way to do it.
So having designed these, the dry fire training cards, give us an idea of a drill from the collection, one of your favorites that you like to run in your own practice routines, and that you recommend for somebody who's just getting started trying to do, trying to get into dry fire, trying to create a routine. What's something that you recommend that you offer in the dry fire card set? There's
two in particular that I still do pretty much every day. And one of them is a 10-second draw stroke. And so what that is instead of clearing cover, getting your grip, drawing and presenting the gun and doing one dry fire rep in a second, second and a half, 2 seconds, you'd slow it way down and do it in 10 seconds. And what that does is it gives your brain a map of what every point in the draw stroke should feel like. And that allows your brain to make corrections on the fly at full speed once it has that map to follow. Mm-hmm. The other one that I really like doing is I call it lunge and shoot. And basically what you do is do lunges across a room while doing dry fire reps. And the big reason that I like that is anything having to do with movement. Mm-hmm. If you want to make accurate shots, a decent amount of it depends on the stability of the shoulder muscles. How well can your shoulder keep the sights in alignment while everything's moving? And that drill's a simple one-dimensional drill that lets you learn very quickly how to handle the up and down movement and stay on target.
And you get some exercise at the same time.
Absolutely. Yep.
So now I'm going to ask you a question that 90% of the time I get really boring answers, or the person I ask can't come up with an answer. So if you can't, there's no harm. But every now and then I get a gem of an answer out of this one, so bear with me. Besides your gun, your holster, the mag carriers, the usual stuff, eye and ear protection, your ammo, what's the most important thing, maybe one or two things that you always make sure you take with you in your range bag to a match?
Wow.
Just stop it. I've gotten some weird answers out of that one. Like I said, most of the time the answers are just not very interesting, or they're like you, they're like, I can't think of anything unusual. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I always like to ask just to see what I'll get.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always have food of some sort with me.
There you go.
And eye drops, because so many ranges are either excessively dusty or the indoor ones are very dry.
Yes.
And eye drops can make a world of difference in how well you can see and how quickly you can see. But the one thing that I have with me that a lot of people probably don't have is something called a Brock string. And a Brock string is a string with beads on it. And what it does is it helps you, trying to think of the best way to describe it, and the best way to describe it is going to involve sharing a problem. Okay. And depending on the population, about 30 to 60% of people, their eyes either focus in front of what they're looking at or beyond what they're looking at, not at the correct distance. Okay. And for shooting, this causes a problem. It causes confusion when you see two sets of sights and two targets and you don't know which combination to use. Mm-hmm. And it can cause some pretty big delays in sight acquisition and sight alignment. And the Brock string helps with these convergence issues. It helps your eyes focus on the correct distance in space, and it helps your visual cortex combine the images correctly, because your visual cortex can completely mess up what you're seeing and feed faulty information to the rest of your brain. And if you aim using that faulty information, you're pretty much guaranteed to miss.
Right.
So the Brock string helps with that quite a bit.
Okay.
And I'll find that I've gotten accustomed to what correct vision looks like. Mm. And when it starts getting off, I'll pull out the Brock string and do 30 seconds, maybe a minute of drills with it. And then my eyes are good to go again. And it can make a 20% or more difference in how well someone shoots in just a matter of a minute or two of doing the drills.
Fascinating. Interesting. I'll have to look that up. Interesting. Very cool. See, every now and then you get some really good stuff.
I've got a whole course on it. It's called Tactical Vision Training, and it's the only course that I know of for vision training specifically for tactical shooting applications. There's shotgun vision courses, but this is specifically for high stress shooting, and especially with a pistol. So expanding peripheral awareness, peripheral vision, the speed that you can shift focus, and the clarity that you can see your front sights.
Okay. So as we kind of wrap things up, what is it about IDPA? You've got you've got your own business. You're very busy with writing and training and developing new training tools. What is it keeps you going back to IDPA, and what is it that you about the sport that you would that you love and that you recommend to a new shooter who comes to one of your, is it something that you would recommend to one of your students that they do to improve their skill?
Absolutely. Yes. Just personally, I am almost always humbled when I go to a match, whether I win it or don't win it. There's normally at least half a dozen things where when I get done, I look back and I'm like, I know better than that. I train better than that. How in the heck did that happen? And in talking with guys and just having it happen over and over and over again, that's just kind of life. And it's a big reason to never stop training and always be deliberate about training. And so that's one of the biggest things, is that IDPA it's a gut check, and it keeps me honest, and it keeps me moving forward.
Very cool. Yep, it definitely is that. As soon as you think you're too big for your britches, just go to a sanctioned match, and very quickly you'll find out you're not quite as good as you thought you were. Well, Mike, it's been great to get to know you a little bit. I really do appreciate you taking the time to do this, and good luck in the future. And I hope I get a chance to meet you face to face on the range sometime. Yeah,
I'd love to meet you too, Lloyd. Thank you very much for having me on.
All right, that's all we've got for you today. Thank you so much to our special guest for coming on the show. If you know somebody in the IDPA community who deserves some recognition, I'd love to talk to them. Send me an email at Lloyd, LLOYD, @unloadpodcast.com. Check out the show notes for today's episode and listen to past episodes at unloadpodcast.com. And if you like what you hear on the show and you'd like to support us, help keep the lights on, pay the bills, we would love your support. Visit patreon.com/unload and make a small monthly contribution to help continue what we're doing here. Tune in again next week for another edition of Unload and Show Clear.